Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Columbus, Georgia. Thank you very much, Whittaker Locke. Whittaker's our accompanist, and he was playing a hymn that's also the tune to Blue Boat Home, which is very appropriate for today's service. The Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Columbus is an inclusive spiritual community that comprised of people who support each other in their own personal searches for truth and meaning. So this morning, because of the pandemic, I'm coming to you from our living room, which has been hermetically sealed and made pandemically safe. And before we actually begin the service, I want to turn the broadcast over to David Rush, our technology guru, who will give us some tips about how to make this Zoom experience more enjoyable. David.
Thanks, Bill.
You're
As
welcome.
usual, we will be posting this service to YouTube later for benefit of those that are unable to attend here on Zoom. Obviously, our preference is people to join here live, but some people are unable, so we'll be posting to YouTube. If you don't want your face appearing on YouTube, you can click on the stop video button now. And of course, you're welcome to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're going to have, after the program and after the closing hymn, we'll have a Q&A and social time. If people can, we'll unmute all the microphones then. People can also use the chat button and type things into the chat box, and we'll try to relay those on. Back to you, Bill.
Great, thanks, David. We start our services by lighting the chalice, which symbolizes reason, tolerance, and freedom, and also respect, compassion, and love. For some reason, respect, compassion, and love is more difficult to obtain this morning, but I got it. It's 2020, so what else could we expect? I hope this morning's service, most of you will find useful, especially as we end this failure of pandemics and civil rights struggles and a bitter election season that seems to continue long after the election. In today's service, we're going to hear about ways that we can renew our own spirit and take some action to turn this planet and our communities and even our local communities into more livable places. We're going to have a message, a special recorded message from the president of the Unitarian Universalist Association, Susan Frederick Gray, and we're also going to have a presentation by our own Rees, Dr. Rees, who is a professor of geography at Columbus State University and knows a thing or two about how geography and science can help us make a more livable planet. She'll talk about acting locally for climate change. I also have some announcements. We are continuing to collect warm coats and jackets for men who have been released from the Stewart Immigration Detention Center south of Columbus. These men are often released in the clothes they were arrested in, which is sometimes t-shirts or lightweight jackets at most. It's a real need. You can contact Judy Barnett about how to do that, and you can email her at our UU email address, uufcga@gmail.com. We're collecting blankets and underwear for the Homeless Resource Network, and you can drop those items off in a box on our front steps at Fellowship at 8827 Heiferhorn Way. And I also want to remind you that we are collecting throughout the holiday season donations for Feeding the Valley, a great food bank. The need is greater than ever. And I'll have more to say about that during the offering. So let's get centered and let's start centering ourselves by affirming the 7 principles that sum up the core values of Unitarian Universalism. 1, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. 2, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. 3, acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. 4, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. 5, the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large. And parenthetically, don't forget our special election in Georgia. It's on January 5th, and it's all about the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process. Number 6, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. And finally, number 7, the one we're really focusing on in Amanda's talk today, respect for the interdependent web of all existence, of which we are a part. One of the ways that we proclaim the vitality of our fellowship is by sharing brief and personal joys and concerns. I'll start by lighting a candle for sorrows and concerns you might not want to share in public, and I'm going to make this an all-purpose candle also for all of those people who have been affected by the pandemic, by the civil rights struggle, by climate change, and so many other crises that seem to have been dumped on the world in the year of 2020. And then I have a personal concern. I'll start the ball rolling. Ellen and I have a good friend, a young woman, who lost her grandfather to COVID-19 recently, and we're keeping her in our thoughts and prayers. And I will also light a candle for our fellowship member, Brad Griffin, who was, I know he's watching right now, and he's was diagnosed with COVID-19. That's the bad news. The better news is that so far his symptoms have been pretty moderate. He does have symptoms, but they're moderate, so let's keep a good thought for Brad.
Whittaker has put on the chat a concern about teen suicide. He says there have been 2 separate attempts reported at Carver High School this past week.
Okay, we've got that one. Let's light a candle for them also. Anything else, David? Anyone else? Well,
Oh, did we miss John Mallory Land's?
Yeah, John Land is here, and that's a good sign. So let's always remember that John Mallory Land is dealing with some fairly serious health concerns, but he's doing it in good spirit. And on the joy side, he and his partner have adopted a cat, and apparently the cat had I believe a young female cat that was a sister. And they had been unable to find her to adopt her, and she unfortunately was hit by a car. So John asked us to keep her in our thoughts. And I also see a concern from Lisa Pyburn to everyone. Her niece was diagnosed with COVID-19. I think as 2020 draws to a close, we're going to have to get more candles. Is there anything else, David or Elise, that you see?
No.
I think that's it.
All right. Well, the concerns having been taken care of, let's celebrate life. Our celebration of life toast, which is unique to this fellowship, it is not a sacrament. It's just a friendly tradition, a toast written by our own Ed Wilson, and you're invited to participate. I'm going to lift one of our fancy cups for this toast. Uh, Please lift your cups with me if you're at home in spirit or in reality. I'll read the toast and we can all join in for the last line. We celebrate life with its beauty and its pain. We lift these cups in tribute to the achievements of human minds and hands, and in sensitivity to the frustrations of misfortune and heartache, not fixing blame or credit for the outcome of chance, sensing the risk, savoring the joy, sharing it all, knowing of the certainty of death and remembering the value of each moment. We drink our toast of celebration to this time, to the future, to each other, to the throbbing of the earth and sea and sky with life. Together, we drink this toast in celebration of life. This morning's offering will now be given and received in the spirit of grateful fellowship. I think most of you know the drill. You can mail your offering to UUFC at P.O. Box 698, Fortson, Georgia 31808. That's a lot of numbers, and I believe we're posting this in the chat in case you've forgotten them. You can also donate through PayPal. Sign on to your free PayPal account, hit the send money button, and send it to us by using the fellowship's email address. That's uufcga@gmail.com. And remember that you can use either the note on your check or the note in PayPal to, if you want to designate part of your donation to go to Feeding the Valley. So while you're looking for stamps in an envelope and signing on to PayPal, Whittaker will play it for us, and I'll say that Whittaker has pre-recorded his opening hymn and his closing hymn, but he's going to play for us live a piece called Album Leaf from Johann Hummel, who Whittaker describes as a forgotten classical music master who got overshadowed by Mozart and Beethoven et al., but we'll celebrate him. So Whittaker, if you will. Thank you, Whittaker. Appreciate it. And thank you all for your donations. They really help. We're doing our best to keep the fellowship going. Our treasurer, Ron Ussery, is doing a masterful job of not only keeping our accounts in order, but finding ways to save us money. So we're doing okay, but the donations really help. Now it's time for a reading, and we're doing something a little bit different this morning. We are going to show a holiday message from UUA President Susan Frederick Gray, who recorded this as kind of a pep talk for the holiday season and getting a running start in 2020. So David, can you play that video for us?
Greetings, Unitarian Universalists. For so many reasons, this holiday season is different than any in memory. Dearly held traditions that bring us joy are pared down, virtual, or canceled altogether. Many of us are tired and grieving. We have lost too many loved ones this year: elders, mentors, family, friends. This is true in our personal lives, it is true in our congregations, and it is true for our faith as a whole. And grief always weighs heavier in the holidays, especially in a year such as this. One of the things that is keeping me grounded these days is remembering to stay in the present rather than dwelling on what cannot be. I welcome grief, yes. I welcome the emotions present in my heart and in my life, yes. And I stay present and open to what is before me today. The gift of sky, of sun, of earth, of stars, of life, of friends and loved ones. It is a challenge to shift my perspective away from what is missing, but when I do, when I'm able to stay in the present and let go of longing for what has been in the past, I find that there is a powerful yes waiting in this moment. A yes in a year full of negation and despair, an affirmation that the world is calling forth from us in this great season of turning, in this season of generosity and goodwill and peace. There is a yes. May we in this season, unlike any before, invite gratitude for the gifts that have emerged and continue to be present this year. We witness what can happen when people help one another and prioritize community over the self. We have become connected in ways new and different, ways that have allowed more people to connect to community and ministry. And at a time that has presented profound challenges, our communities have grown strong in both spirit and in faith. Instead of focusing on what cannot be, may we create new practices of gratitude and meaning that reflect the generosity, the humanity, and the compassion that are needed in our world today, and that are needed to foster more love and more justice for the future. And may all of you, each of you, may we all find time to slow down this season and set aside the pressure and hecticness that is so often a part of the holidays. That has never been particularly helpful. So this year, when so much has been asked of us again and again, we all need and deserve rest. May you have rest this season. As I sit in the beautiful darkness of this season, I am reminded that life is nurtured in darkness, that seeds take root in the darkness of the soil, that babies are formed in the dark of the womb. The world is asking something new of us, and something new can be born from this time. And as we light candles, like we always do in this season, in ritual and celebration, let us embrace the mystery and the possibility of this very special time. In this season, I send you my love, my prayers, my care, and so many, many blessings to each and every one of you.
Wow, finding the yes. So let's continue that theme with today's talk, which is titled Acting Locally on Climate Change. with Manda Rees. I'll just do a brief introduction before Manda joins us. Should say Dr. Rees. She's a geographer. She has taught at Columbus State University, I think since 2005, I think. And she is a not what most of us would think of as the typical geographer. She focuses on connecting people and organizations with geography and kind of showing how geography can improve individual lives, local communities, and the world. So it's very fitting that she's going to talk about climate change. So Manda, can you join us now?
I can, but I can't share a screen yet.
That's okay, we can wait. It's been a little morning of glitches, starting with mine.
No, it says host is disabled, so somebody's going to have to let me in.
Oh, okay. Let me see if I can do that. Hang on a second. You are official now.
All right. Yay. Thank you so much. Can everybody see the screen? It has a sort of elongated globe on it. I can't see that when I'm in presenter mode, so it's good to know. All right. Thank you so much, Bill, for asking me to join today. And I'm really excited to share some ideas with you, broad ideas, broad brushstrokes. These are some questions and issues I've been struggling with myself as a human being on the planet, but also in thinking about better engaging my students. So despite being in the middle of grading, I'm really happy to have taken some time out to do sort of this intellectual work, maybe of organizing what I think is important in readiness of sharing it with others. So today, I think I'm going to actually touch briefly on two of the UU principles, justice, equity, and compassion, which is going to be central as we think about climate change. And I'm just putting on my timer here so I don't overdo it. And then respect for the interdependent web. So just so you know where we're going, I always like to know where I'm going at the beginning of a talk. I'm going to talk a little bit about what climate is and the idea of instability. We're going to look at very specific impacts on climate change on our community in Columbus, because I think that's important. This concept of net zero, which I'll explain in a little bit, which is really about reducing carbon dioxide production, amongst other things. Project Drawdown, which is actually 100 ideas across the globe that seem to be able to really do a very quick effort in reducing our greenhouse gas emissions by 33%, which is the goal in the next 10 years. Drawdown Georgia, which is taking that large-scale global ideas and seeing what's right for Georgia, what makes best sense for Georgia, and then talking a little bit about action that we might take. All right. So, first of all, what's the difference between climate and weather? Some of these things get a little bit squished up together in people's heads, so I think it's important to make a distinction. Climate, as you can see if you're looking at your screen on the top, is all the wiggles. It's what happens within a year, within a day, depending on what the scale that you're looking at. But it's really the short-term day-to-day variability that we get. Climate is something different. Climate is what's happening to our surroundings over a long time, and it's a different type of study. Climatology is different from meteorology, which is understanding what's happening in, just in a relatively short periods. So it's really about climate, these long-term, long-lasting trends that we are interested in when we think about climate change. All right, so now human activity, especially as we know it over the last at least 10,000 years or so, we make a lot of assumptions that we have a stable climate that isn't going to change a lot, maybe, you know, some variation, but it's not going to change long term in very big ways. So it's sort of, you know, just about even. But what happens when climate isn't stable anymore? There's a lot of things that are going to have to change in order to meet this new challenge. So this is a graph, if you haven't seen it before, and it just helps people understand the connection between the increase of CO2 emission, which is carbon dioxide, which is one of our major climate change gases, greenhouse gases, and how that is correlated with the increase in temperature. So you can see earlier on, we have lower levels of CO2s, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And then as it really increases in the second half of the 20th century, we see a strong connection there between the increase of CO2 and the increase of temperatures. Now, I should make sure I'm clear, carbon dioxide is one of several different types of gases that change our atmosphere. It's not the only one, but it is a major one. There are some others like methane, some refrigerants that are really powerfully destructive. So they're small amounts, they do outsized damage. But often what I'm going to be talking today is about carbon. All right, so all these changes, these changes in temperature, what do they actually mean for us in our community? Well, it certainly means increased temperatures and heat indices, which, as you know, as somebody who lives in Georgia, that can be challenging. We have a term about heat days, which are days that are 90 degrees and above. And if you have a look on this little box to the right, you see that in 2000 we had 67 of those heat days. Just in 20 years, that's gone up by over 20 heat days. We're up to 78 days. And by 2080, we'll be up to 113 days of 90 degrees and above weather. So that's really pretty significant. It's a real challenge for us to keep reasonable conditions to live in this challenging climate. So we have, in addition to increased heat, we have more extreme weather in terms of hurricanes, in terms potentially of tornadoes. So we got more extreme weather to plan for. Flooding, not just at coastlines, which is obviously part of still Georgia, but for us, urban flooding, as we have more extreme weather, we often have more extreme rainfalls in very short spurts. And so that's actually a real challenge for our infrastructure to manage that much water. And as you may know, the lowest lying land in any community is typically the least expensive and where our folks in our communities who have least resources end up residing, because it's cheap to live there, or cheaper to live there. So that already suggests a geography to a city or any community where we see people at risk. Health, if you have allergies, we're going to see a lot more days of allergy suffering because we have shifting season, a prolonged hot and sort of summer conditions. Definitely heat-related illnesses. Fort Benning has created a new heat center to reduce the number of deaths in training. And then, as I sort of hopefully suggested, we have in our community massive inequities in terms of income and resources, and that is going to be no different when we're thinking about folks' capacity to weather, no pun intended, these changes in this increase in pressure from this changing climate. So, so let's talk a little bit about why we're talking about this right now. Of course, we've known about climate change for a number of years. Really started looking, the science has been going since the 1830s, looking at carbon dioxide and how that impacts the atmosphere. It wasn't really until the 1960s that we began to think more about some of these impacts on our, more broadly, although in the like the 20s and 30s, there was considerable concern about the impact to the globe. So 2015, we have the Paris Agreement, a climate agreement, which some of you may be familiar with, which says, hang on a minute, we cannot let the temperature across the globe increase by more than 1.5 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels, because industrialization brings this sort of explosion of uses of carbon, coal, then oil, burning to produce that energy for the Industrial Revolution. And we need to go to net zero emissions of carbon by the second half of the 21st century. So that's a big sort of commitment. What is net zero, right? Because Paris Climate Accord says, yes, we got to be doing net zero. So it's a balance between emissions going into the atmosphere and emissions taken out of the atmosphere. And that's quite important to think about. All right, so I'll leave it that one there and then we'll move on. So this is, I really like this graphic. Hopefully that you can see it. I've sort of emphasized, and I often think about our lives in terms of buckets, in terms of how we're producing carbon, individually or as a community, as a nation, and globally. So as you can see from this graphic, perhaps, sources of greenhouse gas emissions that we've got to reduce include energy, food, agriculture and land use, industry, transportation. You can see them all there. Then this is quite important. We've also got, although perhaps 60% of that carbon is staying in the atmosphere, some of that carbon actually also stays in the ocean and in land. And those sinks, as they call them, they're really important to manage and maintain and maybe even expand, because they take the carbon out of the atmosphere, which is one of our biggest challenges in trying to reduce the increase of temperature. So the carbon sinks are really important to think about. All right. As well as reducing what we're doing, making sure that we have places that the bad stuff is stored. I should say that we do need greenhouse gases. If we didn't have them on the planet, we wouldn't have much of a life at all. There would be very little life on the planet. But it's the fact that we have been producing them more and more over the last 200 years. And now we've been seeing what we call a man-made or human-made changes, massive changes in climate. Some people have a hard time understanding that, thinking that the Earth is much bigger than individual human beings, but we are powerful and active enough on the planet now that we are making these massive changes. So what can we do, right? That's the question. Understand and identify the scales of action that we might be engaged with. Identifying just what we're doing in terms of sources of producing carbon and how we might measure that. And I'm talking about globally and I'm talking about individually. There are ways to do that. Identifying these carbon sinks, where it's stored and how to improve that storage. And then some plans. How do we make strategic planning at the short, medium and long term? All right, so Project Drawdown, great, and this has only been in the last 2 years, so this is hot off the press, so to speak. Not only, we can't just have these goals from the Paris Climate Accord and not have any ways of addressing them. So we need to reduce, as part of the Paris Climate Accord, 1/3 of our production in 10 years. Big, that's big, right? It's not a small thing. So globally, a group of scientists have come up with 100 things across the planet that we should be doing that can get us that reduction very quickly. Here is, just the top 10. But as you can see, if you sort of take your eye down that list, there are some that make sense perhaps for us, and there are others like number 5, which is tropical forest restoration. There are a few of these that don't actually work well necessarily for us in Georgia. So literally a month ago, after also 2 years of work, a group of social scientists, environmental justice organizations, the Rees Anderson group, which is an industrial, I think he made carpet, Anderson made carpet in Georgia, made a lot of money, and then decided to think about more the environmental impacts of industry. So there's a lot of money coming from that foundation to rethink what's happening in Georgia. So we've got industry, we've got social and environmental justice groups, and then we got social scientists and scientists from tech and UGA and Georgia State coming together and saying, okay, we've got this big project, global project, right? Project Drawdown. They've got these 100 things that they say that are going to be important for the next 10 years. What in Georgia is going to be important for us? What makes best sense for us? Now I'm talking about sort of a great scale, right? Not just individuals, but systemic scale. What can we do at the state? What can we do at the city level? For example, with transportation, different transportation modes rather than the car. So to create what they call Drawdown Georgia, which is what can we do in Georgia in response. They had 5 different questions. Do we have the technology? Do we have the know-how? Does it make sense financially? And how does this go beyond carbon? Is this just? Is this socially just? Is this environmentally just? Are we making sure that everybody benefits from this and not just a few? Which I think is incredibly important for us as part of how we think about UU thinking, as well as the rest of the state, of course. So I'm not going to go into great detail about these, but here is the 20 most impactful things that literally just came hot off the press in mid to late October of 2020. So it's very new. Not everybody knows about this, but I thought I wanted to share it with folks. And I've highlighted in the top 20 the sorts of things that we as individuals might consider. There are also things here that we might as an institution think about. I am just trying to work with my colleagues right now to start a project at the CSU. How can we think about what we're doing and how we might change things at our institute at CSU, because we haven't been measuring. So you can start to see there food waste, solar, recycling, alternative mobility, which means biking and walking and not just driving, retrofitting, which is, if you remember earlier in the summer when Rush gave a talk about retrofitting homes, that's another part of this larger issue. Plant-rich diets, thinking about energy efficiency in our cars, and so on and so forth. So that's sort of exciting. I think this is what I am thinking about, and we might think about this together as a community, or there might be other parts of your lives that this makes sense to think about, is what parts of our lives, what organizations and institutions do we touch when we think about our responsibilities in this venue. So thinking about the idea of, sorry, I'm just catching up with my notes here. So if you live in a retirement community or a college dorm, in your workspace, in your spiritual organizations, in your recreational spaces, in your civic engagement, how might we think broadly about engaging this issue? Advocating, recognizing the equity and justice, which is so important to so many of us, and connecting with others who might have similar passions but very different perspectives. So here's what I think. Let's consider the sort of types of spaces, where the scales of the spaces we might want to get involved in state politics, or trying to get the city to think about this. We don't have a sustainability officer in the city, but we have some of the most impactful issues related to the environment that in the country, related to what we call the city heat index, and the lack of trees in a number of neighborhoods of color, for example. And trees are incredibly important at reducing some of these extremes of the environment. In fact, I think we're ranked like number 3 or 4 in the country in terms of inequity in that sense. There's lots of different things that we might consider doing. I think identifying sources and measures, right? What are we doing and how do we measure it? Identifying the carbon sinks locally. I'm thinking about my garden, right now. I need to put more trees in there. I need to put more shrubs in there. I need to get rid of a little bit more lawn, right? And let some of the sort of aesthetics go. And develop plans for strategic reduction, short, medium, and long term. What can I do now, right? What's quick and do now? What might I think about able to do in 2 or 3 years? So one place to start as individuals is actually thinking about completing a carbon footprint using a calculator. And there's some really nice, several nice ones on the web that are easily accessible. There are some that are a little bit too simplistic, and I would recommend ones that include some of your consuming habits, because there's a lot of impact that we have by the way we consume, right? The way we spend money on services and goods. And I think that's a lot more accurate, and it gives us a sense of our responsibilities more broadly, I think. So I've got and this will be put, I think, in the chat, is one of a couple of carbon footprint calculators that I recommend that you might consider utilizing in whatever system you're living in. If you really want an easy-ish but quite thorough guide to understanding climate change, there's a nice book by Henson, The Thinking Person's Guide to Climate Change. There's a great book which is very, very accessible. I'm going to use parts of it in my class in the spring. It's very, it's not technical at all, and it's accessible in terms of its writing. It's called Drawdown, which is the the global list of 100 things that we can do across the globe to meet the requirements of the next 10 years. And then also a link to Drawdown Georgia, which is that Georgia focused effort to see what we might do across the state. But there are certainly, as I hoped I suggested in that previous slide, there are things that we can do individually, as well as thinking about connecting with the city to think about more about methane and managing sort of landfills and those sorts of things. So I'll leave it there. I want to indicate that I am not necessarily an expert in all of these areas. I've got some amazing colleagues that I'm learning from every day who are working on this project. And then I'm part of, as a group with CSU, we're part of an organization called Georgia Climate Project. So we're working on these issues as we speak, but it's really important. I think we've all recognized that reaching out to civic organizations, religious organizations, spiritual organizations across the community is really important, and not just our students.
Thank you, Amanda. Wow, and I'm not sure if we gave the I don't think we were able to do the links in the chat, but we'll put them up on our website, and we'll also put them up on the YouTube version of this Zoom when we get it up, probably later today. And remember, you can stick around after the last hymn, which is coming right up, and we will have questions, comments, Q&A, and a little bit of social time immediately after the service. So Amanda has agreed to stick around for that and answer some questions and entertain some thoughts. So we extinguish the chalice here that it might glow gently in our hearts. May it light your path as you leave this place. And before our closing words, I want to mention a couple of important announcements that I neglected to mention. One of them is that next week, Rick Spradlin, our lay leader, will talk about Buddhism, science, and what they can teach us about the universe. And that also on Wednesday, December 9th, is the deadline for voting for our new Board of Trustees in various offices. So if you have questions about that you can find out all about that at uufcga@gmail.com. Just drop us an email or stick around after the service. And you can, somebody who's on our Zoom will be able to answer those questions. So would everybody please rise in body or spirit for our closing words. With unity of spirit, we go our ways in universal fellowship until we meet again. And now Whittaker will play us home with hymn number 82, This Land of Bursting Sunrise.